Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, my guest is Robert Flynn. Now, Robert has been on the show before, and he's talked about all kinds of things relating to music and relating to being an author, and just also about humanity. And I am very pleased to have him back on the show because I think that while today the world is in a real quagmire of what's going to happen, and people are just generally kind of in a strange mood, I think he can kind of give you a sense of what it is that he thinks humanity should be doing and how important it is to pay attention to music, to the creative arts of every sort. So let's start off by kind of talking, Robert, a little bit about why you decided to be a musician and also an author and also a software developer. I'm tired even thinking about it, but let's talk about that a little, starting with the musician side of things. Why is it that you decided being a musician could be a very wonderful, wonderful thing?
I started playing pretty young. I think around 9 years old, I picked up the first instrument that I played, which was guitar. And the guitar is definitely a physical instrument in that when you play a stringed instrument, it's very tactile, and that your fingers are right on the strings and holding them in position and bending them and moving them around. So as opposed to maybe the piano, it's a very close physical feeling. And then there's also a lot of what I call the spiritual side of music. I'm sure you're familiar with jazz musicians, and they talk about improvisation.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of them on our show, and certainly they've demonstrated for us how they do things and also how it makes them feel. But please continue.
Well, for me, and I'm sure all of the people that you're talking about and all the others that have experienced this, to me, when I'm actually playing an instrument, even when you just start out, and don't necessarily know a lot about theory or the technical tools, mental tools, you still have something inside your heart. I think it's much more than that, but you make a sound and you're hearing something in your head, and you're trying to create what you're hearing in your head or feeling in your heart. And I think it's a direct connection to a higher consciousness through our soul. This other part of us that's not physical. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think the release for me, I used to, if I was having a really good solo, for example, or just a particular song, I could almost feel like an energy come up my spine. It was just a pronounced, almost like a Kundalini experience, like you have in yoga, and it was just amazing. I would get that feeling, and things, and I think that was when I was really connecting. Like it was coming straight through me from wherever it came from. So that's kind of an interesting way maybe to describe it, but it doesn't tell the full story. And in relation to spiritual things, and we talked previously about my belief that we are children of a creator, we're created beings. I think that we have a energy within us that's very powerful, and music is a good example of that because it appeals to everyone. I don't think there's anyone that doesn't have some interest in sound and music. So that,
I want to mention something to you, and I don't know whether we talked about it last time, but I'm going to bring it up again. And that is, many years ago, I heard a discussion by somebody who was associated. In fact, I think he had a very strong association with the Beatles. And he did a documentary for TV that dealt with nature and music. And what he showed you is he put a tool next to a tree. And when I say a tool, it was a recording device. He put it next to a tree, and then he put it next to water. And it continues on and on where he put this recording device. And what he was trying to point out is that there is a connection between nature and music, so that when you hear the rustle of the leaves on a tree, that is music, and it's very spiritual. And when you hear the bubbling sounds of water on a waterfall, that is music. And when you hear some kind of other sounds that, like from a bird or some kind of little insect, these little sounds and all these things kind of create a musical tune, if you will. And nature, I'm sure you can relate to this, to the whole feeling of what it's like to be in nature.
Absolutely, and that's fascinating that, you know, that he was having that exercise and actually making recordings for that reason. I think that it's, you know, it's just a constant symphony going on around us, and you know, it's so many different types of sounds and the frequencies. If our human ears were able to hear even more than they're currently able to physically, you know, it's just, I can just imagine the sounds of the universe. If you know what I'm trying to imply here, it's just that sound is such a primal part of what we are. And in a lot of ways, it makes me think it's evidence of sorts that we're much more than physical. You know, for us to be so in tune with vibration, there's more to the energies that make up our being.
Yeah,
but that's a fascinating series of tests that he was trying to do. I'm not real familiar with that, but I've heard of other people doing similar things.
Yeah, and how about the fact that there are people who also are deaf and they want to dance? And what they do is they put them on a floor where there is vibration coming from the music. And that vibration creates a situation where the dancer is able to move and actually, in their own way, hear, which is really remarkable, and a remarkable way to get to the soul of somebody who can't really hear those little sounds we talked about, but they could feel the vibration of it. Isn't that fascinating?
Well, it is, and it's interesting because I just read something here in San Antonio, Texas. There's a young woman that's deaf that I think she was Miss San Antonio once or twice, and she's been very active here, and I think she's working more on a national scale with her website. I don't have all the information, but she's put together concerts where they're experimenting with different ways to do what you just described, where, you know, the people that are attending can wear a little apparatus that allows them to receive electronically the exact thing that you were talking about. You know, they have the music playing, but then they're making it a more inclusive situation for people that are deaf, and they're getting great response from it.
Isn't that wonderful? It makes you feel that there's hope for people who really are missing out on something that is quite special, and that is we take it for granted. Our hearing, for example, or the ability to talk and to share things with people, and that's really sad in a way, but also at the same time, it just shows you that as we evolve, we're figuring out ways to make people's lives much more rich and vital. And I want to just mention one other thing to you, and that is, Robert, that I just attended a symphony, and in fact they were playing Rhapsody in Blue, which absolutely is the most stunning. music, correct? And
That's
the person who was playing the piano, his name is Shelley Berg. He's a very special man. I believe he's the dean of the University of Florida's music school. I'm not quite sure of his title, but he has Tourette's. And what he said was that every time he hits a note, the tick that occurs in people with Tourette's disappears. How about that one? Very interesting, correct?
Yes, it just creates things in my mind, that if someone's blind or if someone has a debilitating disease or someone can't hear, we still respond in these primal ways to music. And it's not just music, it's other aspects of what's around us physically. And to me, that's just more evidence that, we're communicating on more than one level. And we're experiencing things that maybe our mind is not so much capable of being aware of, but the spirit, the soul, is aware of. But, that's a healing example with Shelley that it's just amazing, and there's no real explanation for it.
Correct.
It's pretty fantastic. And the symphony, like the more you listen to music, that's another beautiful part about it is your ears become more trained, your physical ears. And sometimes when you go to a symphony, maybe the untrained ear is not necessarily picking up all the intimate parts of the music, although anyone can enjoy a symphony. But the more you listen, the more trained you are, just like ear training or voice training, it's the same thing. But sometimes when I go to the symphony now, I'm 66 years old, it's just phenomenal what I'm hearing. Because you can hear every instrument so well and hear them all at the same time, and that's another beautiful part about just listening. You get better at listening.
Yeah, and what about the fact that our young people today are listening to music which is actually making them deaf, because they put these earplugs in, and also they listen to music like hip-hop or rap or music of that nature, and would you consider that music? I mean, I know that's a silly question, but personally, how do you feel about that kind of music, and what is the impact that you think it's having on young people today?
Well, excuse me, I'm extremely opinionated in this regard, so forgive me, but I don't place any value on at all from a musical standpoint. To me, it dumbs down everything about music.
Whoops, let's start again with that because somehow or another you're going in and out. So take two, question. Robert, today the young people are listening to music which is basically hip-hop or rap, and it's awfully loud, and it's, I don't know, we talked about spirituality, and I can't personally feel that there's anything spiritual about that music, although young people seem to relate to it, and it tells a story for them. Some even create what they call a sense of poetry through this rap and whatever. What's your thoughts about the impact it's having on our young people?
Well, I'm really opinionated about music, so forgive me for that, but I would say that in my opinion, the type of music that you just described is really not musical. It's not. It doesn't bring about the type of challenges to the ear or to the mind that symphonic music or some of the more musical genres that I personally favor myself. I think that, and some of the content is just terrible as far as I'm concerned. So my children, I tried to push them towards more musical. You'd mentioned the Beatles, I think, and
correct.
my son fell in love with the Beatles after going off on his own way for a while, and then he went from there to more classic types of music, and the same thing with my daughter. I'm sure there's talented people that are doing hip hop and rap, but it's not. In a lot of cases, it's just pre-recorded beats, digital representations of musical instruments, and there's not as much musicality. You can tell the song might be composed of one single chord and beats, and that's it. And there's no movement through chordal progressions. So no, I think that hopefully we'll go back around to a better type, a more challenging, popular music at some point, because it is cool. Something that maybe we'll get out of the cycle.
It elicits another thought in my mind, which is the fact that when music is played, and from different countries all over the world, that you can see that people can get past some of the horrors that they're facing, and also not only horrors, but they can relate to each other, and people who would ordinarily not want to even have anything to do with each other seem to kind of blend together and enjoy one another, and it's a way to kind of, again, bring about peace. And I'm sure you've thought about that a lot too, because I think it's something you as a spiritual person have probably contemplated. How do you get people to like one another, to want to relate to one another, to want to be friendly with one another? What's your answer to that?
Well, I would think that we could use a dose of that in America right now with the divisions politically. But again, I mean, if you have a concert, hopefully everybody at the concert likes that particular genre of music. But I think classical music, the best of classical music, you can bring people in, and they all seem attuned to it because it's got a certain perfection to it, like Bach or Mozart, the real classical geniuses. But it is true, though, that you can put two people together that have opposing ideas and troubles, and hopefully they're able to release for a while and forget about those things. And I do think that music has a tremendous potential for bringing people together. I mean, we saw that. I'm sure you remember Live Aid. Live Aid, for example, was for a really good purpose, and it brought thousands and thousands of people together.
That's right.
That's right. And it's just good for the soul. I mean, people are able to come together in a peaceful way, and more so in music probably than anything else.
Yeah. Well, there's one other aspect to music that I want to talk about, and then I want to kind of get on to some of the things that you've authored, because you're also into writing, and that's been seemingly a very strong part of your life too, in telling stories that people can enjoy. But the last part of the scenario about music is that I just saw there's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful series on one of our cable television networks that talks about musicians, and particularly symphony orchestra musicians, visiting prisons. And there's one where you actually see the faces of the prisoners who have committed some heinous crimes, horrible crimes, and they're sitting there and they're in a state of almost meditation. It has that kind of effect on them, and you wonder if they were exposed to the beauty of music and to, good writing and virtually a lot of other things, that maybe they wouldn't have done what they did. But I thought that was really stunning, just watching their faces as they listened to the sounds and to all the chords and virtually, all kinds of things that happen in a symphony orchestra. Did you ever hear about something like that, or what's your thoughts again about that?
I have heard of that quite often, actually, and I think that it just soothes the beast. Even the most brutal criminal can still respond to sound. And like you just mentioned, there's something about classical music. It just has so much depth, and all the different types of instruments and the different timbers. I just think it's a primal thing, as I've said several times, that even a beast of a man can be, brought to his knees or to tears if he's in the right frame of mind. Whether, someone that has gone to that kind of depravity, I'm sure has a life story that explains some of it. But like we've discussed previously, my book is supposed to bring thoughts about where that comes from. Why a human being could devolve to almost an animal frame of mind where killing is perfectly natural. Not to even mention why an animal would have to kill another animal. Why those killing is part of our existence, and the inhumanity is just so difficult to explain. Music shines as something within our existence that is pure.
Yes, but when you talk about your book, and I want you to talk a little bit about it, because I would like, again, for our audience to know who Robert Flynn is. And books, often the words in a book, while it might not be the way you really live, it might be fictional, on the other hand, it reflects something about you as a person. So one of your professors early in your pursuits of writing really loved and inspired you to write something, and he said very good things about you. He said it was an absolute pleasure to read your book. So tell our audience a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write that specific one, and where you are at the moment, and whether you're going to continue to pursue writing or whatever you do, which is, of course, we just mentioned it, music and software development, which can do amazing things today. So what about your book? Let's hear a little bit more about it.
Well, thanks for asking, Susan. And that professor just simply, it was a ethics class, and it was related to technical, the tech world, ethics within the tech world. And so the papers that I was producing were on subjects that were rather difficult to really bring something out that is interesting. It was, kind of, just basic things, basic ethics. So I really strove to try to add something from a creative perspective to it. I was really careful about my sourcing, and I brought a lot of interesting details in. And he was not necessarily the easiest professor to deal with, but yet he seemed to like my writing. And I wrote a considerable number of papers for him, and then I had other experiences with other professors, but this one gentleman was really supportive, and that made me think that maybe I had a talent. So I love the technical world. I'm still working, and I plan on working as long as I can, but I'm also going to continue to write, and then after I do retire, I'll be focusing much more time on it. But the idea is to have 3 books. My first one was just under 400 pages, and then the next 2 will be about the same length. And I plan on carrying this story further. When we talked last, I'd mentioned some of the concepts about the book. It focuses in the beginning on children that are hearing a voice, and from a very early age, and they're hearing words that strengthen them and push them to engage the evil that they're seeing around them. There's locations within the United States, also in the Middle East, and but not just terrorists, but also just people doing bad things to children is really what stimulated the idea to start with. I was looking for a way for them to be able to have a power that would help them overcome these situations. So the voice has power and actually is giving them power through his capabilities. And that's the beginning of the story. But it also, as I had mentioned, has to do with angels, the main character being Lucifer. And he has, of course, fallen with a third of the angelic host to this world, and he has become bored, and he feels that he's irrelevant because mankind is so easy to tempt. And he's, in part of his heart, he wants to see if he still has a chance at redemption, and that's why he's doing these things. But it also employs Nephilim, which are the forbidden children of angels and humankind. And that part of the story is going to be carried out through the next two books, as well as the children's part in all this. But the crux of the story has to do with the highest angel of creation, who decided that what he had been given was not acceptable. He wanted more control and power. And what I'm really trying to convey is that our lives as human beings exemplify the same problem. We want to control everything, even to this day with our history of inhumanity and war, and with all the good things as well. We still want to control what we cannot control, and it's a matter of the idea of the Garden of Eden being like this almost fantasy idea of what we would be given by a creator. So it starts with the idea of creation. It's not so much religious as it is just using some of the religious icons. And it's more about just a simple idea. If you believe in creation, what would a creator give his creation? And if we are the creator's actual children, for lack of a better term, what little small spark that we have of that power the creator is means that we have much more power than we think we do at whatever level, not just physical. So that's kind of where it's going. And it's,
but Robert, let me ask you this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I really want to discuss this for a minute. The stories that you're telling and the points that you're making are very relevant, very important in a world where certainly a lot of people do not have hope. They have misery. And, Venezuela, if our audience is reading about what's going on in Venezuela, they'll realize how good they have it in their own countries and try to appreciate what they already have. But, it reminds me, the Harry Potter books have had such a strong influence on our books. With that in mind, it sounds like you are able to, and I'm sorry I'm hesitating because I'm trying to figure out how to put this. It's a book that's not straightforward. It's not a story like the Bobbsey twins. They got up in the morning, they did this, they did that. This is very spiritual. This is very unique in the way it's approaching life to give kids the kind of hope and the kind of knowledge that they need. Very difficult, from my standpoint, to understand as an adult. And how do you expect then children to understand this whole creation, if you will?
Well, that's a great question, because when you think about it, Harry Potter is nothing more than a fantasy world that's based on black magic, on magic in general, right? So magic is a fantasy. And these characters within her books are based on, things that we've grown up with that are, characters in a fantastical world. So they're familiar to children and adults, and, like witches or fairies or all these different creatures that her world encompasses. Now, if you take that as opposed to the spiritual creatures that we're also familiar with, like angels, and we've had multiple movies and books about angels. I mean, there's so many of them. This is no less a fantasy, but since it's associated with spirituality and or some people might think religious ideas, that's the real difficult part, because people tend to, they'll buy into something like Harry Potter because, for one thing, it's got wonderful characters, but it's also, for whatever reason, maybe more of a safe zone than something that's closer to what might be considered religious or spiritual. So I think it's an opportunity. I mean, for me, I'm a new writer, so I'm if I can ever achieve the prowess that Rowling has, I'll be very happy about that. And it's going to take some work. But I think this type of book, if it's done well, or series, could possibly have that kind of reception. I've had some reviews from people that have really gotten what I was trying to convey, and they have made some comments that this storyline could be something adapted for a screenplay, and or
how wonderful is that?
Something. I'm sorry.
I said, how wonderful is that? My fingers
really
crossed
great.
for you. I'd love to see that happen.
Well, me too. But your question is so astute, because it's really that question. Can you really? I'm trying to write about something that I consider to be real, as opposed to fantasy. Although I call it a fantasy, but part of the idea too is that we have, as I was trying to convey, more power than we can see at the physical level. And really part of the story is that Lucifer is giving these children, channeling his power through them, and telling them that at some point that not only will they be on their own, but that they have more power than they're aware of to protect themselves. And when, like with Venezuela, you mentioned, it's almost as if people will allow something to happen without standing up and fighting against it. And we see it in our politics. We see it here in the United States. We see it, socialism, communism versus a democratic republic, and capitalism. Nothing's perfect, but allowing our unalienable rights to be taken away from us by some despot, dictator, is hard to understand. I guess it's a wish on my part that we could be able to stand up and fight against tyranny and injustice and inhumanity. Maybe we have more power than we think we do, and of course that is a fantasy. But good will prevail. That's what I'm hoping at all times.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, we can think about all the different historical events that have occurred. I mean, how is it possible that millions of people are killed during these times of war, World War II with the Nazis? Certainly World War I had another problem going on, and it continues. We had Vietnam, and now we have this horrendous situation going on right in front of our eyes. And, one has to think, is that possible? In this, here we are sitting here, and we're talking about music and the beauty of it, and lovely books that can have an impact on children so that when they grow up, they can really be thinking adults. And yet, there's so much horror, too. Well, we could talk about that and talk about it, and I'm just, I want to let you have the last word because we are coming to an end of the show. But, I really think you should tell everybody a little bit about how they can find your book again and what you'd like to see them get out of it. And that's it for the moment, but we'll continue this conversation hopefully at another time. But, how do people get to you, Mr. Flynn? How do they find you and your book?
Well, a very easy way is just to go on Amazon and search for The Touch by Robert Flynn. And it's probably the easiest way. I have a website, which is www.roberteflynn.com. And I'm on Twitter at REFLYNNIII. But if they just go on Amazon and just search for The Touch by Robert Flynn, that'll bring the book up. And it's the Kindle version, which is the least expensive, and then Kindle Unlimited as well. And that's the best way. Hoping that anyone that reads it also will review it, good or bad, because those reviews are so helpful to me. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on your show this second time. It's been really rewarding for me because you're such a great conversationalist. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, when you have a good guest on the show, and I don't want this to be tit for tat, but the reality is when you have a good guest on the show, you can't help but just engage in things that are on your mind and that people can probably learn from. So with that said, my guest today has been Robert E. Flynn III, a software developer, musician, and just a wonderful man who's written a wonderful book, whom I encourage everyone in the audience to please tell all your friends about and get it and see whether you could give him input, because I think that if you do, he's going to really, each time he write something special that'll get people to think, and thinking is so important for our children and for adults as well. So thank you again, Robert, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It's been a pleasure, and I just keep on saying we can talk forever, but at some point we have to stop. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.